All right, I think we can get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the K through 12 Redefining Education in the AI Era Language and Literature segment. My name is Yash Yardi, and I am a rising junior at the Illinois Math and Science Academy. I have years of experience working in several different computer languages and recently started looking into the depths of AI along with its impact on the learning world. It is my privilege to serve as the moderator of this insightful and thought-provoking portion of the conference. Joining me are a group of exceptional panelists who will be sharing their diverse and exciting perspectives on the use of AI in learning environments. Without further ado, let us get to know our faculty panelists. From Lexington, Kentucky, Donnie Piercey has a large motive for technology-driven student learning. He has won the 2021 Kentucky Teacher of the Year Award and represents his state internationally. He runs a very interesting podcast called Teachers Passing Notes and has featured in many media appearances regarding AI. Piercey is a Google certified innovator and trainer and leads the Google Earth Education Experts Network. He is also co-authored in the Google Cardboard book, focusing on exploring virtual reality in learning, and is in the works for another novel on AI. Piercey remains passionate to inspire Kentucky's educators through his work, which has influenced over 30 states and 5 continents. These accolades demonstrate Piercey's amazing experience working with AI, and we're excited to hear his insights today. Our second faculty panelist comes from New York and is the founder of educatingforai.com and debatist.org. Stefan Bauschard has explored the disruptions, rate of change, unpredictability, and more, demonstrating his expertise in AI. He has co-authored the novel ChatGPT, Navigating the Impact of Generative AI Technologies on Educational Theory and Practice. Bauschard has heavily contributed to the field of AI through his work and shares his thoughts on his blog, stefanbauschard.substack.com. His background in academic debate and instruction and course development since 1994, along with his vast knowledge of AI, will display his incredible outlook on the segment. As we embark on this enlightening discussion, let's all foster a spirit of curiosity and respect. I encourage each of you to actively participate via the Q&A button in the Zoom menu, and your questions will hopefully be answered at the end. Now let us begin this enriching segment with Mr. Piercey's view.
All right, well, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, or good night, wherever you are around the world. My name is Donnie Piercey. For the last 18 years, I've been a public school teacher here in the state of Kentucky, had the chance to travel all around the world, and it was literally the day after ChatGPT launched in November of 2022 that I immediately recognized that, okay, things are about to change when it comes to not just public education, but also just every career that every student that's come through my classroom is going to go into. And so the big question that I had was, all right, as a classroom teacher, what are some ways that I need to adapt my teaching, to adapt and change my lessons, so that way the students that are in my classroom benefit most from the learning that can take place. So I do have slides. We can pull these up at the end if you'd like. But really, I've just got some examples and things in here. And what I want to share for the next 9-ish minutes or so is just some classroom lessons, maybe some ideas that you can bring back to your teachers, your professors, or heck, maybe if you're someone who's interested in going into education yourself, just some ideas to think around and play with. Well, it's interesting, when ChatGPT launched, it was important to recognize that I noticed that a lot of school districts treated ChatGPT the same way that they did when YouTube first came out and when Google first started to make its rise in the early 2000s. Lots of, well, we're going to block this, we're going to open this. And then, slowly over time, people started to realize the benefits of using a tool like YouTube, using a search engine like Google, Bing, whatever it is, and that it gives students easy access to learning. So I immediately started to think, all right, well, as a classroom teacher, what are some ways that I should, what are some things that I should think about before I start to use AI as part of my instruction? So from the classroom teacher side of things, like, hey, is there like a learning target or goal that can be benefited from using AI? Do my students have prior knowledge that AI can help fill some gaps? Can AI help me like actually monitor student growth? And can AI help me like assess student learning? But at the end of the day, like, okay, so what is an actual classroom lesson or activity that using AI looks like? Now, most people are familiar with the generative chat AI, like ChatGPT, Bard, Llama, whatever it is. But there are some fun activities and things that you can do using image generating AI. And I told my panelists on here that I had some activities to kind of do here. And AI, as you probably know, like can not only create images, but AI can also expand on images. So we're going to start off with a fun little activity here. I used Midjourney for this, and I threw a prompt into Midjourney, and I asked it to create an image for me based on a prompt. So my fellow panelists on here, the game we're going to play is guess the prompt. So this is what appeared. You got 10 seconds. You can shout it out loud. You can throw it in the chat, or if you're watching live, you want to throw some stuff in the Q&A, you can do it that way. What do you think I typed in to make this image appear? Chat blowing up here. Will The Rock in kindergarten? Ooh, have The Rock teach a diverse group of early elementary school students. Got some fun ones there. It was actually The Rock teaching kindergarten. Of course, like, you know, the creative side of me immediately kicked in. And I said, well, okay, well, what if we changed the to, instead of saying The Rock, I wanted to think like, okay, well, can AI, what if I changed it to A Rock teaching kindergarten? And it was actually able to do it. And this is what it spit out, which just cracked me up. And as soon as I saw that, I immediately realized just the power of AI, not just to like give you silly images like this one. And I love looking at this picture of this kid in the bottom right-hand corner, but I immediately started to think, all right, well, if it can do that, what are some other lessons or activities or images that it can create that can help benefit my learning? You know, I said, hey, create an image for me of two large hamsters watching the Kentucky Derby. It made it in about 30 seconds if you played around with Midjourney yet. Or I'm a dad, I love puns. So I started to think like, all right, well, what if I asked it to make a Jurassic Park with the dinosaurs parked cars instead of being in an actual park, right? It's created this image for me. In addition to 3 more in less than 20 seconds, I now had an image that I could do to create some creative writing prompts to go along with. But the thing is, that's not the only type of lesson that you can do. Yeah, it's really fun to like say, go into, and I'm going to share my Photoshop screen here. It's really fun to go into an app like Photoshop and to take an image like this one from the cover of Taylor Swift's latest album. I'm not a Swiftie, but my daughter is. She said, hey, if you're going to share some generative AI stuff, you got to show them what you can do with Photoshop. So, you know, it's really easy to grab an image like this one, to click the generative fill button, and then you can tell it to add onto this image whatever you want. Maybe she's lighting candles on a birthday cake. You can press generate. If you've never seen this before, it's super cool. It's now going to take that, Photoshop's going to now take that image and it's going to use it, and it's going to fill in what it thinks is going on behind the scenes. Boom. So now you got Taylor Swift lighting a birthday cake, or, you know, here's gives you actually 3 different options. I actually like that one, right, that you can now play with. So the question is, I mean, you've all seen what ChatGPT can do and Google Bard can do with text and things, but it can also do things with images as well. So as a classroom teacher, I started to think, all right, well, what are some prompts that I can do to play, or that I can start to play around with, that can create some engaging lessons for students? And I've got 5 quick ideas here, things that I did with my class last year. You know, one of our favorite ones that we did, we called it playwriting, P-L-A-I, it's a terrible pun, sorry, writing, where I asked AI to create a play on the, to write the first scene of a play on the fly. Threw this prompt in, asked my students who wanted to be a part of this. They raised their hands. they came up, I went into ChatGPT, and then on the fly, it wrote a script for us. As a matter of fact, by the end of the week, we had created about 20 or 30 plays that my students were able to create. Here's one of them from last year where, their idea for the play was, it was the first day of school and all of a sudden an alien showed up who brought a big block of talking cheese for some reason. And ChatGPT was able to do it. And it did it in less than 2 minutes, right? Now, the creative part of this, and what I really like about what AI was able to do, is I only had it write the first scene for my students. They were responsible for finishing it. So provided an exemplar text for them. Or really good at remixing speeches. I love to have my students get up and talk and share, but beyond, say, like the Gettysburg Address, that might be the only, the chance that they in the past have got to get up and share an example of a speech. So I had my students take famous scenes from movies that they loved and said, well, imagine if this wasn't given by blank. What if it was given by your favorite celebrity, like The Rock, Dolly Parton, whoever it was, and AI able to do that in seconds. And then my students were able to get up and actually remix that speech. Or for a science class, I had my students bring in things from home. I was trying to teach them about force and motion, and I had them bring in things from home. We put it all on the back table in my classroom, created this prompt where I said, hey, I'm a teacher in my classroom. Here's things that I have. I want to be able to teach my students about this. And it created a lesson plan for me in a matter of seconds. Now, to be honest, the first time that it did it, it was like, no, I don't like that one. Very simple for me to create that regenerate button, created a new lesson plan for me that was more engaging for my students. And then the next day I got to teach a science lesson using the Matchbox cars, their toys and things that they brought from home. Also, oh, sorry, I shared that one early. We talked about how it's great at remixing speeches. You can interact with historical figures, pretend you are blank, and now you have a chance to talk with different people. Even for high school students, I have not had a chance to do this yet, but I've got a friend who teaches a debate class. I have students a lot of times. As an adult, it's often really difficult to think about, well, what would somebody who thought or thinks differently than me, what would they think, right? What would they think? What are some things that they might think differently about, a controversial topic? AI, it's great at generating, creating those prompts to help you prepare for those debates, especially as me, who's someone who's not great about, preparing for things on the fly. AI can help you do some prep work for that. Heck, even this morning, I was playing around. I wanted to use AI to write some code. I am not a coder by trade. I understand, like, I can do hello world in Python. That's it. I jumped into ChatGPT. We have our back to school bash with students this next week. And we actually, I got my hands on a Raspberry Pi this summer, this computer that's the size of a credit card. And I thought it'd be fascinating if, hey, for our back to school bash night, we're going to do a live demo now. I actually got AI to write for us a computer program that turned the Raspberry Pi into a photo booth. And it did it. Now, I know absolutely nothing about coding. I know the screen's really bright right now, and I apologize for that. But what I'm going to do, I've got my little script here that I wrote. I've got it pulled up on the Raspberry Pi behind me. I'm going to stop sharing. I know that's super bright. You probably can't even see the code on there. But we are going to live demo this script, this computer Python script that I wrote. And y'all are about to be in a selfie. So everybody smile. Oh, once it focuses in. All right, so it says click here to take a photo. Do it. All right, everybody smile. You can see my back, which is great. All right, it took the photo. There it is. And then I've even got it rigged up where, again, I know nothing about coding, but I was, it walked me through the steps to type in the code to have it like authenticate and send an email to the students on our back to school night. So again, just one of the many, many things that AI is capable of. And even as a classroom teacher, I'm thinking of students with special needs, students with, students who might struggle with reading, students who might struggle with reading comprehension or dyslexia. It is a great tool to help them learn how to be successful with their struggles to ultimately help them become better students. Whew. All right. That was fun. Moving on.
All right. Can everybody see? Yeah. Okay, great. It's great to be here. And I just met Donnie, but I feel this bond a few ways. One, I've been to Lexington, Kentucky about 100 times for debate tournaments. He's probably shocked to hear that, but I've been there many times. And I had a similar first experience to what he described. Like, oh, he said he used it. And he was like, wow, this is going to change things. Now, I was sitting in a school library preparing for a debate class, which I'll pick up on a second. And I was just killing a little time and checking the newspaper. And there's an article that said this thing's going to kill Google. And I thought, well, gee, I better look at this. I use Google all the time. And I tried it right away. And I was like, wow. And I realized my first reaction was this, this was just ChatGPT 3.5 on like my first prompt ever. I was like, wow, this can basically do like what a very beginning debate student can do. It couldn't at the time quite do, especially with my prompt, do what a better debate student could do. But I thought, okay, the technology is going to improve, which we've obviously seen a lot of. And it's really going to change basically a lot of what I do, right? Like whether you can say the change is good or bad, but that change is going to happen. And just to pick up on the debate thing, Donnie mentioned coming up with 3 arguments. So yeah, I mean, we have it. So it'll kind of list out like major arguments on a topic. You can even say, please list out the major arguments, include the responses and include the responses to the responses. And it'll give you kind of basically like an organized list of all the arguments. It shows all the references. And now I think you need 4 for this, when you put in your profile, you can ask it to include contrary ideas like as a default. So that's just to kind of tie that in a little bit. But, on the I was asked to speak a little bit about language and literacy. And I think language, kind of English education, writing education, has probably been the most dramatically impacted by this, right? In terms of at least typical assessments, right? The research paper, things like that have been challenged. We heard a lot about that yesterday. If you came to the higher ed section, I do a bit of higher ed and K12. So I've been in both. I've been in the higher education professors writing group since January, and they've obviously kind of struggled with this the most. And I think, I don't know, let me see. I don't think there's let me just see if I can present this so you can see it a little bit better. Yeah, so that allows you to see it a little bit, but AI is everywhere. It was referenced, some of the schools started banning it. Well, to me, it was just like, this is a complete waste of time. They hadn't even banned all the other places you could access basically large language models, but now it's everywhere, right? It's in Bing and Bard. It's in like coming into Google Docs. It's in Quillbot. It's in Grammarly. Ethan Mullick, is a big influencer on this at the Wharton School, wrote this article called The Button, where it's like, if you just type help me write, it'll help you write, or at least get started on your paper. I notice now in Google, it's even like connected, and it'll kind of, if you type in a topic on the side, it'll write out some basic information about the topic to get you started. So, we're kind of well beyond that, right? And it can also read, right? So with Claude 2 and Perplexity and some of the ChatGPT 4 extensions, you can actually upload really entire novels. People talk about uploading The Great Gatsby to Claude 2, but with Perplexity, you can basically upload a file at least three times the size of a novel, over 300,000 words. There's really no limit. So it's just what's practically possible. So in terms of kind of, the kind of written response assessments, please read this, here's some summary, answer some questions, come up with your own questions, feedback. A student can do this. I uploaded a couple of Supreme Court decisions about education that I was familiar with into Claude. I asked it to summarize each. I asked it to compare and contrast the 2 decisions and to write a 5-paragraph essay, just catching up on the joke of the 5-paragraph essay. And it did a pretty good job. And I instructed it that I was a 9th grader. And I think if, you just kind of, if you haven't really changed your teaching practices and that was somebody's assignment and they turned it in, I would think that student would probably get an A. It did a really good job of kind of summarizing and comparing and contrasting the decisions. I knew a lot about them. So it kind of presents a lot of challenges, right? Into knowing like what work students are doing, right? Especially regarding to research, essays, questions, and responses. And I think there's a huge dilemma that everyone acknowledges that there aren't any great answers to. Students still need to learn how to write. Now, we can debate like how much or how well they need to learn how to write. And this might make some people mad because, you know, look, they obviously don't need to learn how to spell as well as they used to because we had spell checker. We had basic grammar checks, right? So it's like, if you kind of just write something, well, it kind of helped bring you to the next level. Maybe I don't want to have that whole debate, but I will say what's obvious is that students still need to learn how to write. But in terms of assessing their writing abilities, it's becoming incredibly difficult absent honesty. And I have a slide that kind of goes through all the problems with the plagiarism detectors, but honestly, that's kind of like debate's like kind of over. You know, if you if you read all the research on these detectors, they don't really work. OpenAI stopped using their detector. You know, if you were in the college thing yesterday, every college professor, at least that was in there, said like, I'm not using these things anymore. So, you know, short of, you know, kind of running through a lot of hoops, you know, we're kind of really dependent on honesty. It's always been a problem with the paper mills, but the detectors could detect that. And I think regardless of the output of the paper, writing has a lot of value, right? Like when students have to write, they have to think, they have to understand, they have to reason. You know, you know, obviously all this is new. And as I've been learning more and more about it, I find myself writing stuff out. I do like write a lot of my blogs and things, but not just for that reason, right? It helped me understand kind of a new topic, right? Like this intersection between generative AI and education. And, you know, if you listen to Chris D this morning, he had a great expression. The destination is not the journey, right? You think of the journey as going from one place to another, but the destination, you know, most students aren't publishing the papers, right, that they're writing in class, right? They're using that to kind of think through the tool. So thinking through is the destination. But if the students just use this to produce their paper, and, you know, we saw in the student session a little bit ago, some students just saying, well, yeah, I just use this for my work. There's no denying that. You know, the organizers had some evidence yesterday. It was about higher ed, but basically like 75% of kids are at least doing this, are at least using this to help with their homework. So this is kind of a, you know, a pretty significant challenge. And we could talk about ethical questions. That was a question. I don't, you know, are representing their own work. How do you give credit? Like, you know, there's a lot of things that we could talk about as ethical questions. I don't really, if people want to talk about any of these, I'll leave them up here for a second. If people want to talk about any of these particular questions, I'm happy to talk about them at the end. I have a lot of thoughts and opinions and kind of knowledge related to these questions if anybody wants to raise them. But I think these are some of the key ethical questions. The other question that was brought up by the organizers is, does this challenge originality? Well, of course it does, right? But think originality's always been challenged. Like, what is original? Who has an original thought that like just comes out of nowhere? That, you know, we have thoughts because we interact with people, because we read things. So originality is already up in discussion. And someone I met through all this, Dr. Jason Gulia, just wrote a paper on kind of challenging this. You know, AI is like a collaborative tool, right? It's like a partner. And even what Donnie described, right? Like how he's using it, like it's kind of like he's got a friend there that, you know, maybe almost you know, half as good as the teacher of the year, right? But kind of helping them think through things, prepare materials, come up with different examples, right? Like, you know, that's in a way it can work. And, you know, a writing professor yesterday in one of the sessions says, well, it's kind of controversial. It's like, well, if an artist trace something and builds from there. And that's kind of a little bit maybe about what is going on. The detectors are pretty bad. Again, I'll just leave these reasons up here for a second if anybody wants to discuss that afterwards. I think it's a divide we may see. I think colleges and universities are moving away from detectors. People are still using them. So I don't, at the university level, I don't want to say they're not, but some universities have kind of even come out for whatever stances they've had and said, you know, you probably shouldn't use these things. You shouldn't, at the very least, you shouldn't rely on them. Like it may be like a potential indication, but I can talk about that more later if you want. So I think there's kind of a combination of like defensive and offensive approaches. And what do I mean by that? It's like, you know, most teachers, unlike Donnie, right? Most teachers are going to struggle, like I would, to change everything they're doing in like 1 year. And you probably need a pretty big shift, right? Like away from some things. And like I said, kids still need to learn how to write. So, you know, there are a couple different approaches. You can have an honest dialogue with them. There was a debate about that yesterday through the different panels, you know, oh, we need honesty because they realize the detectors don't work and they realize they can't reread every paper or not reread it, but like, you know, kind of try to prove, you know, challenge and go through all the data of like how the paper was constructed. And these are college professors that have far fewer students than most people in K12. And also to kind of be realistic in the discussions, right? If you imagine that just like the things are going to carry on like they have in the past, you're going to lose credibility with your students. Like the students are using it. We heard that in the student panel, not all of them, but it's pretty widespread. So a couple of suggestions people have come up with, you could ask them to include like some in-class, something reference to the in-class discussion that you had. I mean, that helps a little bit. You could give one of these models a sentence and ask them to write about it. Maybe something like personal to reflect on, to add to the reading. You could have some conversations with them, like, how did you pick your topic? Like, why did you structure your paper the way you did? You could do like a Q&A, and, debate. Sebastian talked a lot about that last. I think debate, and there's some other work I'm working on, given my background in debate, has a lot of potential to kind of, it's always had more potential in the classroom, like is kind of a basic instructional method, but it really can reveal what students like know about the topic. It can help them develop their like durable skills or soft skills, which, critical thinking, communication, the skills that there is I think one point of agreement among educators is that even recently, like in the information age, just came out, right? But now everyone's saying, especially in true of AI, that students really need more opportunities to develop critical thinking skills, to develop self-expression, to develop public speaking skills, like general communication skills, all these types of things. And that's something we know we can do. But you want to be careful not to just be defensive, because it just kind of turns into a game. It's like a cat and mouse. It's a cat and mouse game, right? And like, there's some things that are just true, right? Like, people can say ChatGPT is not a great writer. Now, there's a lot of other tools, right? People just keep talking about ChatGPT. There's a lot of tools, and I referenced a couple, I should say, at the beginning, that are really, they're kind of trained like on top of large language models to help students write their, they don't come out and say this, but to help them write their papers, right? So it can kind of write even now, like better than like most of our students, right? Like my reaction is like, this can write a better speech than my beginning debaters. It can write as well as a lot of people. No, if they just copy and paste the whole thing, will kind of be obvious and sound like, robo text and those kind of things, of course, right? Like, but with a little bit of kind of ingenuity on top of it, it's going to do like a pretty good job. And of course, as many of you know, all students don't care if they get an A, like they're happy to get like a B or a B minus or something like that. It can usually meet those standards, and it's just going to keep getting better. Like AI, like there's been a lot of talk about learning bots getting to know more about the students and able to help them. Well, the more it gets to learn about the students, their personal history, their writing styles, like what they're capable of, the more it's just going to also be able to mimic their output, right? We taught, some people talk about digital twins. Well, digital twin is someone or something that can do exactly what you do, like perfectly, right? So as you kind of move into like a digital twin type situation, then it kind of completely collapses. So, and students realize it's going to be used more at work. So, just things I think you can do, like have the honest dialogue. There's a lot of focus shifting to, expository writing. If you went to Stephen Wolfram's session, he's talking about the best prompt engineers are people who are really good at expository writing. And then couple that with kind of developments in like kind of computational thinking or computational expressions, that can really help you. So I think that'll be valuable for students. The other thing you do is think about like adjusting a standard for a paper. And, Ethan Mullick said this in other contexts, like, I assume most of you get angry, like if a student turns in a paper with like spelling errors, right? Not because you don't think they can spell every word, but they didn't even use spell check, right? Or like really basic grammars, they didn't use grammar check. So to me, like, their papers should almost come in like almost like perfectly in those regards, right? Like that should be the foundation. Like if you don't have all your words correctly spelled and your grammar's not correct, then maybe you get a C, right? And then you could demonstrate the use of AI and some personal expressions or unique challenges. And here again, I'm just trying to protect a little bit of the paper writing. I do think it's an important skill. I think we'll see less of it. The big people, the big thinkers in this field, some of the big technology people, this kind of say like, there's really no way over time to distinguish, once a kid gets to a certain level and knows how to use the tools, what the tool is writing and like what the student is writing. And, those are a few just other things, you can start requiring a paper as a large of a project. Maybe you're working with a science teacher and the writing is kind of, combined into like what they're learning in science. You could require a written paper that's like, I think you could have a project where you say like, the first thing we're gonna do is just have AI write a paper. And then the second thing you're gonna do is you just write a paper. And then we'll talk about like the differences between that output. So they come to see the changes that are being made. So there's kind of some ideas for like what you could do with that. And I think finally, there are some fundamental challenges here, right? Like AI is going to keep advancing faster than the way we can study it. And you see a lot of calls for people saying, well, don't use AI till we like have evidence-based proof that it works. Well, first of all, we have to kind of maybe redefine what skills and knowledge and types of things there are in an AI world. Second, like by the time you test that and figure it out, and I'm not saying you shouldn't try, we'll be on like ChatGPT 5 or the equivalent of 6, or like, then we're going to say like, how does this technology work? Like, there's only so much you can do. I think the second thing is, schools just have to admit to some degree they can't really control the student use of the technology. The only students you can block from using this technology are kids who have of such limited means that have no other like device. And now it's not just a computer. Like you can use it like on a smartphone. Even kids of very limited means like have smartphones, right? And there's LLMs now like all over their smartphones. You can use ChatGPT 4 and Snapchat, right? So there's really not a lot they can do to block the use of the technology, like not even in the building, let alone like outside the building. This is very new, I think, for most people, so it's difficult to manage. And I also think there's like an enormous amount of information in the media that you got to be careful of. Like there's this article circling around, which is kind of true. It says, well, and Stephen Wolfram talked about this, there's like a little bit of drift, right? And there's different explanations for drift of its abilities. Maybe it's starting to train on false data. Maybe it's just like they tried to put in too many safety restraints on the data. We don't really know, but the headline of that article was like, made it sound like these models are falling apart. If you read the conclusion of even the Wall Street Journal article, okay, or even the original paper, the authors just say like, hey, we're going to have ups and downs. Like these models are going to have ups and downs, not that like these models don't work anymore, or like AI is collapsing. So, but the media is trying to draw your attention to it to kind of connect you in and make it sound like it's the end of AI. And I think finally the one thing I want to say is, they divided, it's not a criticism, right? But this was divided into like K12 and universities. This conference, and there are clearly some differences. But one thing I think, one place there's a lot of commonality is like in this language area in these papers, like, people, especially like say maybe grades 9 or 10 to, freshman, sophomore year of college. I mean, the writing instructors, the English language instructors, they're all facing the same challenges, especially the ones in colleges where they're saying, hey, like our students are coming in, they don't really have fundamental skills. Well, they don't have the fundamental skills in high school either, right? So I think there's a lot of overlap there in terms of what challenges both professors and, especially high school teachers are dealing with, right? Like, I don't think like first grade teachers are worried that kids are going to use large language models to do their assignments. So that's kind of just more like how you might enhance it. But I think there's some commonalities there. So I just kind of threw a lot out. Those are kind of some of my general thoughts. And I see there's some stuff in the chat I haven't looked at yet, but I'm sure Donnie and I are both happy to talk some more about what people want to talk about. I just wanted to get some ideas out there.
All right, well, those were some fantastic presentations from our faculty panelists with interactive parts, many perspectives, so much valuable information for educators, So now we'll be turning the floor over to the student panelists. And at this time, we'll be answering some of the questions from the audience. But before that, allow me to introduce our two student panelists. So with a fascination for innovative and upcoming technology, Arush Jain is a rising senior in the San Francisco area. Arush is passionate about pursuing computer science and will share his unique insights with AI in the classroom. Our second student panelist is from the Commonwealth Governor School, a STEM magnet program in Virginia. Sebastian Rao is a rising senior and a nationally ranked high school debater, co-founder of his school's installment of the International Youth Neuroscience Association, and has contributed to the same novel co-authored by Stefan Bauschard. These feats show Sebastian's overall interest in STEM and his interesting stance on AI and teaching. So let's start with a few questions now. So here's one kind of relatable to what Mr. Bauschard just finished talking about is, are there any resources for helping educators redefine their standards for assignments and papers, for example?
Well, I think.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, well, I'll answer part of that. I'm kind of like Donnie chatting too. Like I think so. The one thing is, that kind of gets interesting is, and this is more in K12 than in universities, but professors have more control over like kind of the goals of the class and, how the classes are taught, those kind of stuff, right? Like you say, well, what are the resources for redefining the standards, right? So the standards are usually issued like in America by the state. And then, the state and, maybe the districts will have like some clarification standards about like how you achieve these, right? But like teachers don't necessarily like have a lot of flexibility to like change the standard. They might be able to interpret them one way or the other, like those types of things. And their students may be assessed on some tests like design, to the original standard. So I think one thing that's really challenging, especially in K-12, is like, if these standards are kind of like not, I'll just say if they're not, or they're not all relevant, like to an AI world, right? Teachers are still going to have to like teach in the world, like where the standards govern, because it's kind of like how the students are going to be evaluated on tests and like those types of things. The second thing is, I don't think anybody, as much as I've been involved with this, like all kind of levels of conversation, I don't see anybody really at these levels talking about like what these standards, not even talking about it. I'm in New York and I saw, they issued a thing over the summer about like something like related to these education standards. It was like, it didn't even like mention, like reference like AI, or maybe like, in the future we'll resolve this. It just kind of was like a repetition of what they're going to do. So I think, so that's kind of one answer to the question. The second thing is, I think within that, you can look at the standards and say, well, what skills are like they trying to get the students to develop, right? Because writing is a skill, right? Like speaking is skill. English language arts, sometimes there's speaking skills in there as well. Sometimes there's debating and reasoning and argument skills. At least there are some in the New York standards. And you can think about, well, gee, how do I want to teach those in the world of AI? I mean, fortunately, I don't do much regular teaching. I just coach a debate team into school, and then I do these other things. So, the standards, like, so they don't really apply to me. Like nobody cares, right? So it's like, I'm going to have the debaters do all kinds of things. Like, I'm going to have them write their first like drafts of their speeches with like AI and show them how to do research with like Perplexity and, practice their rebuttals against the system and like all those kind of things. And I think you could do some of those things within the standards that are there. Right. But I think really in some ways, Donnie's like, I don't know, Donnie, what do you think?
I think it's important to recognize that there's thousands of teachers that have already started to figure out as they're getting ready for this upcoming school year. I mean, because they've been either playing with it all summer, they've finally had time over the summer to sit down and start to think about lesson plans. Maybe they're a STEM teacher and they're trying to figure out some activities. And actually in the next session, my two friends, Kevin Brookhauser and Steve Dembo, they'll be talking about some things that they've done with their students and they've had their students do in regards to that. But I mean, honestly, in my experience, or in my opinion, like a lot of this stuff, it's just like anything else in the ed tech world. A lot of it just starts with grassroots educators. And honestly, a lot of times it's students showing their teachers like, hey, did you know that this can do that? And a lot of times students, like, if you really want to start to see that change, it is really important that you all are also really vocal about like what this AI technology can do. Like, show your teachers. I mean, feel free to show them that, hey, did you know that you can paste this article into here and come up with 10 quick discussion questions in class that we could be talking about? Or, hey, did you know that you can use AI to do blank? And, obviously, I think that is, in my experience, that's how most of the change happens. I mean, over the past 18 years of teaching, I remember when Google Drive and Google Docs first launched over 10 years ago. I mean, how many school districts were like, no, we can't use this, we can't use this. But students started to use it, and students started to collaborate and write pieces. And now, whether it's the rise of YouTube and create and all that stuff, like the reason why schools and things started to adapt it is because students were using them, and educators realized, okay, if this is a tool that my students are going to grow up with, whether they're seniors that are just about to go off to university, or even, I don't think I agree with you, so that on the first day of kindergarten, I don't think we should put an iPad or a Chromebook in a student's hand and say, hey, this is going to do all the work for you. As an elementary school teacher, I think it's really, really important to show students that AI exists, but to really build those foundations foundational skills. So that way, when they get to middle school, when they get to high school, they're not just copying and pasting something that a teacher found online to create a 5-paragraph essay. They're able to recognize, okay, I know what a well-written speech sounds like. I know what a well put together essay or thought or debate sounds like. And they'll use AI not just to do the work for them, but to make what they create and to make what they create better. I mean, sometimes exponentially better.
Yeah, I think that idea is definitely important, especially like and this is me thinking about, putting together this, these presentations and having students put together a conference like this is especially important when you're talking about like grassroots students engaging with education and like how education works. I'm thinking the idea of like engaging with the mechanisms of higher education in K-12 through this conference especially is really important. And what I talked about in my presentation just previously was the idea that we're envisioning this like future world where we're able to use AI in this way that's really productive and is like we aren't using it when in ways people think are unethical or other things like that. And that has to start with first we have to be able to implement that in the classroom correctly. So teachers need to be able to understand what that means. But then what does that require, right? We have to take a couple of steps back. And I think that requires obviously both students who are using it to engage with the teachers and to engage with education, as well as also like when we finally get started with this conversation that seems to like not be starting the way it should be, right? With like educational standards and such. When we're talking about how to apply like AI in education now, like what Stefan was talking about within New York, not really trying to engage with how like education should change, that really necessitates like these ideas of like literacy courses, like the Educating for AI thing, things like that. So I think that's really important. It also shows this kind of like cycle of student use informing how teachers should use it, which then can get regulated and then brought up to the top to then develop things like AI literacy, which they can then guide how the classroom actually looks. And that process takes time. And so the goal really should be, how can we kind of quicken that process maybe a little bit, because AI has taken over education so fast and it's developing so quickly. So I think that idea is certainly really interesting, and how to like navigate those standards.
Yeah, and all teachers, they love engaged students, right? Like there's definitely
Right.
some, like Donnie references that are like, they're into it, work on their lesson plans. Others, I've worked with it, like, yeah, they're trying to avoid it, right? So there's a little bit of a disagreement there, right? Even though I think more are coming around, right, and more even embracing it and like wanting to use it, but they all love engaged students, right? So.
Yeah, so as Sebastian was saying, like without these literacy courses, teachers will like never truly understand its AI's all of its potentials, such as like assisting with grading or providing feedback. And then with these, since when the teachers notice all these benefits and that all the time that they can save, then they'll be able to help students learn more. They will fall into this cycle of relying on AI a little bit more. So they will have more time to actually focus on teaching the students instead of like, let's say, grading an assignment, which can take a long time. And then since grading will be sped up, then students will be receiving feedback faster. Then they can apply that feedback into their future learning, and then they'll be able to learn more information in a faster period of time, allowing students to develop skills such as critical thinking and like these soft skills that you talked about a lot better and a lot faster, and to a lot higher of an ability that they might have previously would have.
Somebody I see, I see like in the chat asking about recommendations for AI literacy courses. I know in particular, the one that I keep throwing out there is like the Educating for AI, because that's something that Stefan obviously has worked on especially. And like, I think the way you could actually find that easily, underneath my speaker profile, I have a QR code where that's linked to in particular. And there was also in the chat from last time, there was a document that was inserted that has other recommendations for AI literacy courses. So I don't know if there are any other recommendations we'd like to throw out.
Yeah, I just typed it wrong. So we have that one for the AI literacy is for students, and then I'm running one other one for like teacher
Gotcha.
for school administrators and teachers, including CTOs who are in our class who, because I think this technology is a bit different, right? Like it's interactive, it's dynamic, right? Like we've had a lot of technology come into schools, and that's why I'm more optimistic, right? A lot of people say like, well, we've put all this technology into schools, but like our reading like scores haven't improved. But this is a dynamic, interactive technology, and it's there's this like debate about tutoring bots and like what all they can do and, where they're heading. But there is a lot of really strong research about how valuable one-on-one tutoring is. I've seen it with my own kids. And I, it just makes sense. Even absent the research, if you just sit, if I were to sit with Sebastian and we were just to work on debate and learn how to debate, he's going to learn that faster if he's a group of 30 students in a classroom. Like there's just no changing that, right? And I think that the fact that becomes dynamic is something that, nobody can really have any experience with. There was a little bit of generative AI before November of 22, but they were pretty nascent models. Like, look, even just do a mid-journey photo search from July 2022, you'll laugh.
Right?
It really
wasn't.
it really wasn't being utilized. And with some of the, and I don't know if anybody heard the Chris Deed talk today, which I thought was fascinating to me as much as I've studied this, right? Is that there's kind of this bifurcated debate, like, oh, large language models can do a lot. No, they really can't. And, what the point he made, and he thinks there are like inherent limits as to what they can do, right? And as he acknowledged, that's debatable. Some people think it can do more, like we're going to have other models that are going to solve a lot of these problems. But he's saying, look, even with what they can do, even with what he thinks they can do, which is obviously somewhat limited based on his description, right? They can have a really big impact on kind of like, the future of jobs, right? Like he's saying, even with these limited applications, they're going to impact the job market, and they're going to impact the type of skills we have. And I love it. I'm going to use this in presentations now, right? Like how we need to train people to be like Captain Kirk rather than data, because even with the way they are now, they can essentially function as data. So we're really training students to kind of compete with things they can't really compete with, especially like at a monetary cost.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that, and this is like the analogy that I bring up with teachers when I did a presentation on AI on Friday to about 150 teachers. And the analogy I used was, it's important to recognize that right now, we are sitting at the Atari 2600,
right?
What AI can do. And, if you've got students that are in preschool or kindergarten now, by the time they graduate high school, you're going to be at the Nintendo 64, the Super Nintendos, all that, right? And so it's one of the reasons why, as educators, it is so important that we start to figure out now, what are the ways that we can use this tool, and because to benefit student learning and engagement. So that way, when they graduate, when they go on, like they are prepared, and they're not just prepared to answer questions. They're not just prepared to, have it generate responses for them. Or, I know the Taylor Swift thing was kind of a silly example, but to actually use it I love the example that you brought up of like saving teachers time. AI does have the potential, if people start to use it right, where imagine I could leave at 3:00 every day, and still be as an effective teacher as I want to be. And hopefully, as we start to play around with these tools more and more, because it is still, I know, like you mentioned, AI has been around for years. I like to use the analogy of like predictive text on your phone. Like that's something that's been around for years. It's just really, really, really good at predicting what it should say. So we need to stay prepared. We need to stay on it. And students, please, 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 this fall, show your teachers some of the things that you're doing with AI, because I promise you are going to inspire them to either design a lesson, to come up with some unique project based off of something that you share with them.
Yeah, and that was one of the things as a business school professor said yesterday, just talking about challenges, it was in the context of professors, but the same thing applied. It's like, people aren't going to change all their instructional methods and like assessment methods, right? Like in the next month, right? But she said, try something, right? Try something new, try experimenting with it, right? If you think, and then maybe if you think, well, gee, this is an assessment I give, it's really, really important, right? It's a large percentage of the grade, but it's really vulnerable to AI. Then try to change that one, right? Because you do want like integrity and assessment, but the point is you don't have to do everything at once, right? You can just try, as like talked about, like lesson plans, or like I've done some stuff with vocabulary that allows it to give like examples. Start from there, and then maybe try a new project that maybe it's not even a significant part of the grade because you don't know how it's going to go because you've never done anything like this.
I had a music teacher who used it to write a sea shanty with accompanying chords about a book that they were reading in their reading class. Wrote the whole thing live. Then she whipped out a guitar and just, she knew how to play it.
She started playing
it for the first time. right? I mean, that's fun. And there is that element of even though this can do so much, there is still so many creative ways that we can start to use AI in the classroom. And again, it's why I'm trying to embrace it, definitely sometimes with a little bit of skepticism, which I think is important to still ask those questions. But there's going to be thousands of activities and lessons that are designed over these next few years that they're going to change what the classroom looks like.
Yeah, so like
One lesson at a time.
It's incredibly important to like keep some of the traditional methods so that students will still have human interaction, which is a really essential part of learning. So then they're not only looking at a computer for their entire learning. And by utilizing both traditional methods such as like timed writes, essays, group projects, and new AI methods, students will be able to retain human interaction, which is incredibly important for critical thinking skills, but also gain the valuable expertise that AI has to offer, such as like lesson planning, grading, personalized feedback, personalized learning. It's all these different applications.
Yeah, and I think in a way it's good that like people do have like different perspectives on this and want to use it in different ways. Like one of the sessions I was in yesterday is a professor who's working on bots, and I was like, well, what about the human interaction? He's like, well, it's going to be able to do that too. Right. So, but it's like, as Harush pointed out, we don't want just bot interaction, even if it can, eventually we'll be able to simulate that to like a large degree. So I think also for students, like encourage you to say, don't be like angry at a teacher because they want to use like generative AI or don't like want to use generative AI or use it more or less or have fun with it or don't, right? Like it's all part of the experience like that people are going to have. Right, interacting with different people, different points in their career, people with different values who are trying to like learn, emphasize different things in the instruction that they're providing. It's not all or nothing. I don't think like, September, whenever your school starts up, all the teachers just need to start using generative AI tools and like everything they're doing and teaching kids about generative AI.
There's a reason I still love recess, and we don't take devices out to recess because, hey, here's your 30 minutes to go play. And even in class, we have what I call screen-free weeks, where it's just like, all right, this week, we are not using devices to intentionally slow ourselves down to start to think and process. But that was a great point you made.
Yeah, and I think actually that last point is really interesting, especially like the idea that we can have some kind of refresher from the constant use of this AI, or not even just AI, just traditional online technology, because it does point out, obviously, like it makes us more productive, right? Which is the idea then slowing down from that isn't always necessarily a bad thing either. So, combining those and figuring out how can we move forward with understanding how to both increase human interaction while integrating AI, but also sometimes just to take it slow, and not slow in like the way we're like developing policies. Obviously, we shouldn't just be like prohibiting it and then like being like completely 100% like, let's just, limit this as much as we can. But just like when we're in the classroom, within discussion, within human interaction, it's definitely a great approach that is pretty refreshing to hear.
That will prevent like, and many people have. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's a good mix of a lot of qualities of creativity and also like information that you could apply to a classroom. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's
I'm trying to prevent Skynet from happening, really is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, the more so Jan LeCun he's working on his other models. He said the good people in the world, and they talk about the dangers, he was in one of these debates about the dangers. He said there's more good people in the world than there are bad people in the world. So the more good people we get understanding the AIs, using it in good ways, then that whole like the realistic part of that debate aside, then we're more likely to have a better world. Because people are going to use it for bad things, right? Regardless of whether or not they're going to be like AI monsters, but people are going to use it for bad things. Like that's a reality. Every technology has been used for good and bad. So we should use it for the good. And generally, I find the one thing I really like about education is that, people who are in education are good people. Like I've never met like a ruthless teacher, right? Like they don't make movies about like ruthless teachers, right? Like they're right. They have like the ruthless businessman who didn't like care about anybody and let all employees like live in poverty or whatever. But you don't have any I don't know, I've never seen a star being the ruthless teacher. So I think education is really what gives us hope for whatever the world's gonna end up looking like.
All right, so yeah, we covered like a lot of really interesting points in that one question. So any like unanswered questions, they will be included in the next segment. But I think this is a great place to end our delightful discussion. So we've shared a lot of insights about specific examples of AI being used, strategies for educators to use, some like resources for that as well, future challenges, and just creating that balance for students to embrace AI learning as well as maintaining creativity in the classroom. So I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists and speakers for taking the time to share today. And I would like to direct everyone's attention to the networking and brainstorming session at 2 p.m., which is 2 p.m. CST, which is in like 5 minutes. And although we were unable to get to everyone's questions today from this short session, the upcoming segment will cover many of those unanswered queries and allow people to network with the educators as well. So along with that, a conference report as well as all the segment recordings will be sent out with the other unanswered queries as well. So with that said, we'll conclude the session here, and we hope you found this discussion really intriguing and helpful.
Yeah, and I think everybody in here, you came because you're thought leaders in this yourself. So be sure to continue the conversations with everyone in your schools. Thank you.